Hey guys, today we're going to be looking at some new cameras and some leaked information on the Canon 90D to see whether or not you need to upgrade or what camera you need to upgrade to. Really, this is kind of selfish for me because I've got a Canon 80D and I'm really intrigued at the Canon 90D, so I'm looking forward to jumping in. But before we do that, this channel is all about videos and filmmaking. I do videos on gear, tutorials, vlogs, and entertainment pieces, but overall I just want to help you make better videos. So if that's something that you're interested in, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, hit that bell icon so that you're notified every time I post a new video. Let's get into it. Last week, Canon leaked some information about the Canon 90D that's coming out, and there's some pretty impressive specs going on with it, so let's go over a few of those. First of all, though, I don't consider myself a photographer. I can take photos, but there's far better people at it than I am. So let's just go over some of the specs on the camera side before we get into the video, which is what I'm more excited about. So it's a 32.5 megapixel sensor. It's an APS-C sensor, which means it is a crop frame, meaning that it's more like an 80D or a 7D. The 6D and the 5D Mark III are full frame sensors, which means it's more like a 35mm camera, kind of like these. These are 35mm cameras. There it is. You pop it open, you put your film in there, and that door right there, that's what a 35mm film size looks like, because that was where your 35mm film was exposed. That and anything smaller than that is going to be a crop frame, because if you crop it down and only expose a smaller size, you're gonna get what looks like a zoomed in shot, because if you take this picture, you crop it down to that and then blow it up to the same size like your computer screen, it's gonna look like a bigger picture, but really it's just a smaller sensor. It has a 220,000 dot RGB plus IR metering sensor. Optical viewfinder and face detection, that's promising. Face detection inside the optical viewfinder. It's got 100% optical viewfinder coverage, which is pretty great. I don't use the optical viewfinder much. My glasses kind of get in the way. But for those of you who do, people say that helps out a lot. I've heard people complain about 98% coverage sometimes, and they want that extra 2%. Well, this has that extra 2%. So it does 10 frames per second in continuous shooting, but it locks AF when it does that. So it's good for sports. It's not good for sports because you want to be able to adjust your autofocus when you're doing that. It's got 45 autofocus points, and they're all cross-type. It's got eye detection in autofocus in servo mode. So that means it can focus on an eye and lock focus on that eye as it moves forward and backwards. It doesn't have to be on the same focal plane. So that will save a bunch of time and headache just being able to lock that focus in that small of detail. So it's got a Digic 8 imaging processor. It does 4K video, and that is what caught my attention on the leaked specs. It also does full HD at 120 frames per second. That's really what caught my attention, and we'll backtrack to that because there's a downside to that, but you want to hold on for that. It's got a touchscreen, vari-angle, similar to the Canon 80D. I have a Canon 80D, I'm shooting on a Canon 80D right now. Dust and water resistant, which is really the reason I bought a Canon 80D over the Canon T7i. And if you've seen some of my videos, you know why I need that water and dust resistance, because I'm pretty, that kind of stuff happens. And the last thing is that it's got auto image data transfer to smart devices via Wi-Fi, which is pretty cool because you can just press a button and it'll go to your device instead of having to go into the Canon app and look at the photos. You're scrolling, and that's the one you want, and you hit sync to phone, and 10 seconds later, now you have it. Now you start editing, and they just take it a step away. You just take the picture on your phone, hit the button, syncs to your phone, come back later, you've got it. Now let's kind of backtrack a little bit to the 4K video because there's a downside, and for me this is a major downside. For some of you this might not be a major downside, but it only shoots 4K in 30 frames per second or 25 frames per second, or at least that's what it looks like right now. Sometimes with the leaked specs, they don't leak all of the specs, so we'll wait and see for that, but 30 frames per second or 25 frames per second for me is a deal breaker. My final videos are never in 30 frames per second or 25 frames per second. If I lived in Europe or somewhere that used PAL, then I would use 25 frames per second, but I never use 30 frames per second. For me, that looks too smooth. I heard one storyteller tell it like this. 30 frames per second is what our brain kind of sees reality as, and when you're looking at TV, you want to be told a story, and 24 frames per second is kind of like that dreamy look, that it gives it that feel that somebody's telling you a story. 30 frames per second just looks too real. I've always explained it like 30 frames per second looks like a soap opera, where 24 frames per second looks like a movie. And I like to tell a story and generate that emotion from it. And having full HD at 120 frames per second is definitely something that I'm looking for, but there are other cameras out right now that do that. Blackmagic Design Cinema Camera 6K just came out a couple weeks ago, and there was no leaked information on it. No one even expected them to come out with a new camera. They announced it, and the next day it was available for sale. Now, it does raw 6K video at 24 frames per second, 25 frames per second, 30 frames per second, 50 frames per second. If you downscale that 6K just a little bit, it'll go up to 60 frames per second. And then down to 5K, it will go 60 frames per second as well. It does RAW, it does ProRes, ProRes HQ, ProRes LT, ProRes Proxy. You can shoot RAW and it'll record a proxy file for you so that you don't have to work in RAW the whole time. It doesn't do photo shooting because it's a cinema camera, but it's got 13 stops of dynamic range in that RAW video mode. So the big question is this: how much is the Canon 90D gonna be, and is it worth me upgrading from the 80D to the 90D? My guess is that the Canon 90D is gonna try to compete with the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K because no one expected the 6K to come out. I think the 6K might be the reason Canon leaked the information about the Canon 90D, to try to generate some buzz and keep money in your pocket that you would spend on the 90D away from going to the cinema camera 6K or 4K. Now, how much is it gonna cost? I'm thinking it's gonna come in right at $1,200 to $1,500. I'm hoping it's less than that, but the way these cameras are going right now, let's think about the Canon EOS R. That's kind of their top of the line mirrorless camera, coming in at $2,000. It is a full frame sensor on that one, so I think that the 90D might be a little bit less than that. For me, should I upgrade? I could probably sell my Canon 80D for around $800. That means I'll have to divvy out $400 to get the Canon 90D and have a similar camera that does 4K in 30 frames per second, which I probably won't use or slow down. Here's a little trick also, this is a freebie. If you have a camera and you want to shoot and it only does 30 frames per second, you can either take that camera and put it into a 24 frame per second project and keep it real time, or you can slow it down a little bit. If you're doing B-roll, I would highly suggest doing this actually, because you don't drop any frames this way, but you slow it down just a little bit so you get that extra frame back. To me, it gives it even more of a cinematic flair. It's one of my tricks that I do sometimes. In fact, sometimes I'll shoot 30 frames per second and then slow it down to 24 frames on purpose just to have that look. You can get close to 24 frames per second by going to 25 frames per second, but you still get that one frame every second that's just not there. So it's gonna skip a frame one time every second. And if you're doing like smooth action, that can be annoying. So for me, what I'm gonna be using it for is video. So if we look at the video specs and I compare it to what it's actually more comparable to, which is the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K, coming in at a whopping $1,295 on B&H right now. You can actually go right now and look on the internet for Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K footage, and you'll be able to find some footage there. And it looks like a phenomenal camera. So yeah, let me know if I should upgrade at all, and if I should, what should I upgrade to? The Blackmagic Cinema Camera, the Canon 90D, Sony's, Panasonic's, the list goes on and on. What's your favorite camera? Let me know in the comments. I know I'm gonna get a bunch of comments like, get the Sony A7R or the Sony A7S or the Panasonic GH5. Those are all great cameras. I stick with Canon because of the color science. I think the skin tones come out really nice just straight out of the camera, so that's kind of the reason I stick with them right now, but I'm by no means like a Canon fanboy or anything like that, so I can be convinced. Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and hit that bell icon so you're notified every time I post a new video. That's it for this one. We'll see you in the next one.